अगर आपके पहचान या पते में कोई बदलाव नहीं है, तो अपने बैंक या एटीएम या बिजनेस करेस्पॉन्डेंट यानी बीसी के पास जाएं। या बैंक में रजिस्टर्ड ईमेल या मोबाइल नंबर या मोबाइल बैंकिंग ऐप या पत्र द्वारा उसका डिक्लेरेशन दें।
और अगर कोई बदलाव है तो
ऐसे में पहचान और पते का नवीनतम प्रमाण दिखाएं। अपना खाता सक्रिय रखकर बैंकिंग सेवाओं का लाभ उठाएं। बस।
आरबीआई कहता है,
जानकार बनिए, सतर्क रहिए।
जब धरती चीर कर निकलता है लोहे का पत्थर और मिलता है मोंगिया के जोश से, फिर तपता है, पिघलता है और बनता है फौलाद। अब होता है सरिया सारी खूबियों के साथ। मोंगिया स्टील, मजबूत देश का मजबूत सरिया।
Bharat Reloaded, a special series to mark the 12th anniversary of the NDA, looks back at these momentous years through conversations with policymakers, economists, entrepreneurs, and investors. It takes stock of a decade that sought to reimagine India. I am your host, Anil Padmanabhan. Throughout this series, we have explored how India has attempted to build state capacity, expand inclusion, strengthen public health systems, rewire labor markets, and reposition itself in the global economy. Today, we step back from individual sectors and look at the bigger picture to understand what the data tells us about the nature of India's transformation. Joining me today is one of India's most respected economists. Neelkanth Mishra is the chief economist at Axis Bank and soon to take over as India's executive director at the World Bank. Few people are better placed to help us understand whether the last decade was a period of growth or a deeper structural reset that delivered India a new operating system. Neelkanth, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I wanted to begin with, there's a tendency to judge every government in measures like GDP or election cycles. As an economist, you have been observing India so closely. So, what are the structural shifts that have been undertaken in the last 12 years?
There are quite a few. I think the most important is the focus on reducing cost of capital. So, I think this government, more than any in India's history, maybe the first NDA government was perhaps one which had seen some fiscal conservatism, but this one has been relentlessly focused on making sure that the government doesn't spend more than it needs to, and which has meant that the cost of capital is among the lowest we've ever seen on the debt side. The emphasis on digital public infrastructure, the fact that Aadhaar was pushed aggressively, the fact that, and maybe in some of these things have been opportunistic in the sense that AMFIs, systematic investment plans, but they're all built on the guardrails of UPI and Aadhaar. So that has meant that the cost of equity capital has also come down. Things like GST have meant that there is much greater transparency. The push on RFID, the FASTags, has meant that global pension funds can invest in Indian road assets without worrying about some leakage happening and black money being circulating and all that. So the cost of capital has been a very big effort. I think the second is the use of digitization to make sure that government processes become more transparent, that the friction, or at least the rent seeking that used to come at lower levels has been reduced. It'd be a far cry to say that it has been addressed, but I think that has been a very big step forward. The third is a very conscious recognition of the federal structure of India. that that the state governments, think about this, that every year the government allocates 1.5 lakh crores as capex to be undertaken by state governments. That the government has the fiscal resources. It does not want to shrink the fiscal deficit too fast, but it would rather let the states, because that is where the expenditure needs to happen. So I think these are very important framework level approaches that the government has taken. And in the last 2 years, under the Rajiv Gauba committee and the Dr. T.V. Somanathan committee, there is this focus on process reforms, on making the government shrink its footprint even further. And those are what appeal to nerdy economists like me, that, like yesterday in a very important government meeting, someone was saying, oh, labor laws are the same for women and men. And so why are you quoting labor laws as the reason why India's female labor force participation is low? I said, no, that is wrong, because there was a law that prevented women from working the night shift. There was a law that prevented women from working in roles that required heavy lifting. They weren't allowed to work forklifts. There's still a law which prevents them from working in factories that control hazardous material. I mean, we are okay having NDA grads going in infantry, women, but somehow the law has to protect them from getting into. So I think many of these changes that are happening, or land use conversion in Andhra Pradesh becoming free, these are changes which are remarkably powerful. And these are all signs that the government wants to shrink its footprint, and allow the private sector. So stop being in the way of the private sector. So we'll give you infrastructure, we'll give you low cost of capital, we'll try to minimize. Of course, people like me would want it to happen faster, but we will try to minimize our footprint and intervention in your business, and then rest you should take care of it yourself.
Would you add, the way this government has legitimized business in this country as a stakeholder?
Yes.
Previously, if you looked at Bollywood, the bad character was always a businessman.
Absolutely.
Today, they are a legit stakeholder, right?
Yes, and what I think has happened is that the government, instead of being the doer, is increasingly starting to look at itself as a facilitator. So things that I wish this happens faster. It is starting to happen, and it, I think, all driven from the top, because that's the way you will see senior policymakers in RBI, in the government, that they will jokingly say that we are the problem. Why do you want to get us involved? And this is remarkable. It's very refreshing, and it is very remarkable. And I wish this happens faster. It happens at the state level as well. Because, sometimes bureaucrats in various states will come up and say, oh, our state has to do a lot, and this is what we are doing. I've told my department to do this and do that. I said, boss, you don't have to do anything. You have to facilitate the private sector. So, for example, take UP. UP has to go wants to go from $250 billion of GDP to $1 trillion of GDP. There is $750 billion of GDP that needs to be created. Now, GDP is income. So you need to invest capital to generate that income. Even if you take 25% return on capital employed, you're talking about a $3 trillion investment. Now, does the UP government have it? Does the central government have it? No. So if you want to get that magnitude of capital, only private sector will get it, or households will build hotels and households will build their own houses. So you have to facilitate that. You can't do. And I think that change of mindset is now starting to show up across the bureaucracy. And I must say that that's also a refreshing approach that has emerged in the last 12 years.
So, Neelkanth, this mindset reset plus all the structural changes you listed, together, if we pull all this together, are we looking at a new operating system for India as opposed to the past, which was defined around license Raj, over-regulation, etc.?
I think so. I think that is starting to happen. I must say that we need to move even faster on this front, on these fronts, than we have done so far. So, for example, even though we have learned how to connect in different cities, so the Delhi-Mumbai Expressway will halve the time taken to travel from Delhi to Mumbai by road, or Raipur-Vizag will go from 16 hours to 6 hours, 7 hours, something like that. Mumbai-Nagpur is remarkably keen. But the cities themselves are still a nightmare. And so while I think the rail bridges or rail infrastructure that has been built, now them 16 trillion rupees of new projects that have been conceptualized, the connections, of course, that needs work and that will keep us growing. But to sustain this, we need to do even more. The second big shift that is happening is, I think, partly driven by what's happening in the world, but also required for our internal purpose. And so I'll talk about this, the issue of Atmanirbharta. The fact that if you don't want to get caught in the middle income trap, the only countries that have escaped the middle income trap or have burst through the middle income trap are countries like Taiwan and Korea and Spain, which have invested heavily in technology, their own technology. But there is also a changed global environment where when Taiwan, Korea, China were emerging, they had an assisted rise. So Europe and the US wanted these countries to do well. Japan post the Second World War. India's is going to be a resisted rise. So we need to invest a lot more in our own technology. And therefore, with this pressure, I am hopeful that the pace of change within the government, that even though there are bad corporates, there are bad actors, but as a system, having a more open system with much greater private participation is a much better overall outcome than having a very controlled, highly controlled system. So you're right. I think this is a very different way of operating. I mean, the very fact that someone from a private sector background is chairman of Aadhaar.
Now you're appointed executive.
So these are, yes, no, I'm very honored, and there's I mean, already I'm hoping I'm not putting myself under undue pressure, but there's so much to do. And so the fact that the government is willingly incorporating like-minded souls without thinking about that, oh, this person is not from the bureaucracy, these are all very positive signs. And I think we have, but we have to, because getting 7-8% growth year after year for 25 years is not easy. We have to learn to take policy risks continuously. We have to learn to live with the discomfort of, like, if you were redoing this place, there would be dust, there would be sound, there would be lack of clarity on once finally it is done, will it look very neat? That's where the economy is. So we have to learn to live with that discomfort of the parallel I like to give is, it's very comfortable driving a car at 20 kilometers an hour because you don't get into accidents, but it takes a long time to reach your destination. Whereas the Chinese have been driving at 80 kilometers an hour on a bumpy road for 45 years. And they've changed wheels on the fly, and one problem emerges, you solve another one. So it is that hunger for growth that we must develop. So I think we've covered long distance in the last 12 years, but there's so much more that needs to be done.
So, Neelkanth, what you're saying is that we have a new operating system, but India has multiple speeds historically. So it will take time for all the alignments to come, but that's not a luxury India enjoys because, like you said, India is alone in its path to becoming a developed economy. So a few metaphors that stand for this new economic operating system are Aadhaar, UPI, and of course GST. I'm just citing a few. So how have they contributed in changing economic behavior, both at the entity level and individuals?
So the first and most important is, that it's only when people work together that magic happens. See, humans as a species has become successful because we've learned to cooperate. We've learned to, because individually I specialize in something. I don't know how to grow food. I don't know how to treat myself. I don't know how to build my house. I do a very finely tuned specialist thing. Left in the open, I won't be able to survive a month. But because I'm living in a society, so the more people we can get together to share their skill sets, the more the incentive to specialize. Like a school friend of mine, specializes. I think he kept studying till he was 40 years old. There's some particular kind of heart palpitation that he addresses. Now, imagine someone spending 20 years just studying to become an expert like that, if there was not enough market for it. And so it's only when we create larger and larger pools of cooperation that real value and specialization and productivity starts to come up. Now, this is not possible if you can't establish trust. So the first is this person who he or she says this is? And this is where Aadhaar comes in. And frankly, in Aadhaar, we are not resting on our laurels. So we already have an average of last year 9 crore authentications a day, peak of 13.5 crore authentications in one day. We are preparing for 25 crore authentications a day. We have
more than the population of many countries in the world.
I know. But see, this is the problem we have to solve. See, who will help us solve these problems? Because see, there are these many, and so in Aadhaar app has been revamped. We want to make sure that usage becomes absolutely seamless. People should stop thinking about Aadhaar. I mean, that would be my dream. That it's all seamless, privacy protected, and accurate and secure. Similarly, you very rightly said we are doing things at a massive scale. We need to. See, there is a certain, the more I've studied economics, and as you know, I'm not a formally trained economist, I've understood that there are these vicious cycles. Like if your banking is only through branch banking, the banking penetration will only rise at a certain pace because people have to become a bit prosperous, they can afford banking. Then the power of banking, having access to a financial inclusion, starts to come up. Now, there is only a certain pace at which you can improve. But if you bring down the unit cost of banking from 100 rupees to 1 rupee through mobile banking, is when magic happens. And then suddenly your growth accelerates. And so what you have is, and this is where things like UPI become powerful. I know of so many highly literate people who were so scared of doing digital financial transactions. And now my father does it. So scan and it's done. Now, I would have been shocked. And so that's the power of this. Or if UPI didn't happen, SIPs wouldn't have worked so smoothly. Because I was talking to someone in the US mutual fund industry, and he was saying, $30 a month from 11, 12 crore folios was just the cost of KYC and cost of transfer would take away all the value. But in India, the cost of KYC is effectively free, and the cost of transfer is also free. Now, if we didn't have this, see the amount of risk capital we are generating. So think about 1% of GDP now is coming in through SIPs, right? So imagine if this money had gone into bank deposits. Of course, banks would have got into gold. It would have would only be deployed in a certain way. In the case of gold, not deployed at all. The fact that the color has become red, not blue, has meant that the country as a whole now has 1% of GDP worth of risk capital. Now, initially it will be fly-by-night operators. Initially it will be private equity firms getting exits. But eventually, entrepreneurs are tapping into these flourishing markets and raising capital to invest. So this would not have been possible without digital public infrastructure. The fact that MSME credit, the micro, small and medium enterprises, because it is much easier to give 100 crore loan than to give 10 lakh rupee loans. And or 1 lakh rupee loans, right? So the fact that this muscle is building up is because GST. And what I'm like gives me goosebumps is that because I was involved in the GST setup from like the revenue neutral rate committee. I told my associate and I working Ravi that we are the first people to ever calculate a revenue neutral rate, and so I've been deeply involved with. I was involved with this whole GST process, and I was aware of how people like Nandan used to say that having invoice based reconciliation will mean that we will have data against which we can lend. This was all planned. This was all foreseen. And when it starts to work at this massive scale, it is so powerful. So I think these and we have to keep doing this. We have to build new layers on top of it. So ONDC has not worked so far, but as people who are involved with UPI say, UPI had 4 near-death experiences. So you have to keep at it. You have to keep it.
Second life after demo.
Yeah. So but even before that, there were regulatory. So there were large firms which were stalling the progress of UPI because they thought payments was a good business. So why should? And then the regulator had to slap them on the wrist. So lots of things have to happen. So same with ONDC, same with OCEN. The Open Credit Enablement Account Aggregator. Exactly. So OCEN can be an incredibly powerful engine. So we need to build more and more layers on top of this, and otherwise, how do you see 7 to 8% compounded growth without taking the balance sheet risk that China took? It's going to be very difficult at a country that size.
Neelkanth, before we wrap up, one very important point you flagged just now of this new operating system is trust, right? So India is not a very heavily built economy on trust. So how far down the road have we gone? Is it like a tipping point? Have we crossed the tipping point, or we still have a way to go to create a genuine trust economy like, say, the UAE or Singapore or at that level?
I think the very fact that I remember when someone who worked with us when we had moved to Bombay, and this is 2011-12, and I insisted I would pay her by IMPS, and so then she had to have a bank account, and she said, "Oh, I'll give this money into the bank account. Will I get it back?" It's a trust issue. I said, "Yeah, of course, right." Of course, now having worked closely with RBI, that trust comes with a lot of effort. So we moved from that to people blindly scanning QR codes and the money moving. And so I think there are the trust in the system that these things work. That if infrastructure is built up, it will mostly work. I mean, there's still disasters happening, like new bridges with potholes and all that. But by and large, I think a lot of things have started working. So people have started trusting the institutions a lot more than they would have otherwise. But we have a very long way to go. I must say that what we have built to a large extent at the national level it needs to be replicated at the city level, where people feel uncomfortable spitting on the road. People trust that the system is important, that people don't violate traffic rules, people don't drive on pavements. So those kind of things. When houses are built, that they're not going to fall. When houses are delivered, like RERA, for example, has made sure that at least when a developer does something, it at least will deliver on time. By and large, I mean, there's still problems. So I think at the local governance level, I think and you look at the low trust economies in villages, because the tragedy of the commons, right? So basically, even in my village in Bihar, there are pools of water which are effectively on the thoroughfare, and it's in no one's interest to solve it. It's a sign of a very low trust economy. Why should I do it? So I think translating that at a local government level, where people feel that it is their society, it is their responsibility, is, I think, another 20 years of work. But we need to work on that.
Finally, if all of this comes together, the new operating system, a trust economy, and of course, all of the other structural changes, including capital investment. So we are looking at a compounding effect on the economy that is
Yes.
bound to kick in.
Yes, and absolutely, and as you become more prosperous, to some extent, given the low-hanging fruit, the conviction in some of these changes also improves. Remember that we are a democracy. We are also a precautious democracy. So we have to ensure that the fruits of these gains are being, as far as possible, equitably shared. Tangibly, and so people should see that they're benefiting from it, because otherwise the political conviction, I was just reading this book, how Africa works, Joe Studwell's Asia Works was very popular. So I could see that how Ethiopia's remarkable progress completely unwound after 2012 because of political uncertainty. So unless we have to make sure that these gains, but as the gains start showing up, I think the conviction that this works is felt throughout the system. So it's not just the voter, but also the bureaucrat. See, the bureaucrat of today is night and day different from the bureaucrat of 25 years back. Because every 45-year-old today has seen the fruits of reform. They have cousins who are, running businesses, and so that deep distrust, as you said in Bollywood's, that businessman to corrupt hi hoga, that deep distrust is gone to a large extent. There are still people who believe that private sector has done this and all that, but I'm seeing that percentage is dropping. So the bureaucrats will start trusting that this delivers and this works. The voter starts to accept it. And then people are willing to undergo change and trust that, if I go through this change, the outcome for the overall economy is going to be better. So yeah, but I think we are starting to solve these problems. But one point we've not discussed and is very important, that there's a deadline to this. That aaj nahi to kal doesn't work. When I did this study when I was at Credit Suisse on Asian demographics, that was the first time I started talking about we have to get rich before we get old. Because the way our fertility rate is plummeting, I think we are going to cross the median age of 40 well before the 2053, which is the current projection. And once you cross 40, it's very hard to grow fast when at a median 48. So we have 25 years to go, and we have to do the best we can. So we have to remain focused on growth.
Thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you, Arun. Thank you.
पता है, लोग अक्सर मुझसे पूछते हैं कॉल सेंटर का स्टेडी जॉब क्यों छोड़ा? आई वांटेड मोर आउट ऑफ लाइफ। बस मैंने अपना स्टार्टअप शुरू किया। जानना चाहोगे कैसे? Then